There is a moment that happens quietly, not in a dramatic argument, not in a single explosive confrontation, but in a stillness so ordinary it almost passes without notice. You are sitting somewhere familiar, maybe at a holiday table surrounded by people who share your blood, maybe in your car after a phone call you already regret answering, maybe lying awake at 3 in the morning, running through a conversation you have had 100 times before. And something inside you, something beneath language and beneath logic, simply goes still. Not numb, still, like a part of you that has been holding on for years, finally lets go. And in that silence, you understand something you have been refusing to understand for a very long time. That this is not going to change. That you have tried everything you know how to try. And that staying is no longer something you can do without losing the last piece of yourself you have managed to protect. This is the moment that most people never see. The world sees what comes after. The unreturned calls, the empty chair at Christmas, the social media post from a parent asking why their child abandoned them, the whispered conversations at family gatherings where someone explains with a mix of confusion and judgment that so-and-so just cut everyone off. Out of nowhere, for no reason, just walked away. But there is always a reason. There are always years of reasons. And the fact that those reasons are invisible to everyone watching from the outside does not make them any less real. It makes them more painful because you carry the full weight of what happened, and the world only sees the ending. This video is for the people who made that choice, and for the people still standing at the edge of it, wondering if they are allowed. It is for anyone who has ever been told that walking away from family makes you cold, ungrateful, selfish, or broken. It is for the people who have tried to explain and found that no explanation was ever enough. It is for the ones who grieve something they cannot name to anyone who would understand. Because here is what the world almost never talks about. Estrangement is not an act of cruelty. It is almost always an act of survival. And it almost never comes first. We grow up inside a story that feels like gravity. Family is everything. Blood is thicker than water. You do not turn your back on the people who raised you. These are not just cultural phrases. They are embedded in something deeper. In the architecture of how we understand loyalty, love, and what it means to be a good person. To question them feels almost like questioning the ground beneath your feet. And so most people do not question them. They endure instead. They endure because they love. They endure because they hope. They endure because leaving feels like proof that something is wrong with them, not with the relationship. They endure because they have been taught, directly or indirectly, that their discomfort is the problem, that their needs are too much, that the right response to pain within a family is to try harder, forgive faster, and ask for less. And for years, sometimes for decades, they do exactly that. What psychologists have come to understand about family estrangement is something that challenges almost everything popular culture assumes about it. Estrangement is rarely sudden. It is rarely about one event, one argument, one betrayal that broke everything overnight. It is the result of a process so slow and so quiet that the person living through it often cannot see its full shape until they are standing on the other side of it. There is a concept in psychology called micro-trauma. It describes the accumulation of small wounds, individually too minor to name, collectively devastating in their effect. A criticism delivered in the tone of concern. A boundary pushed just slightly further than last time. A feeling dismissed before it could be fully expressed. A moment where you reached for connection and found distance instead. Each of these moments in isolation seems too small to justify pain, too small to bring up, too small to explain to anyone else without sounding oversensitive or dramatic. But they do not stay isolated. They accumulate, layer by layer, year by year. They build something inside the nervous system that begins to feel less like family and more like a climate you are always bracing against. You start to notice that your body responds before your mind does. Your shoulders tighten when the phone rings. You rehearse conversations before they happen. You spend the drive home from family gatherings quietly recovering from something you cannot fully name. You smile in photographs and feel something hollow behind it. This is not drama. This is not oversensitivity. This is your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to track patterns of safety and threat and to respond accordingly. And when the pattern it has learned is that a certain environment consistently produces pain, it begins to protect you from that environment, whether you consciously choose that protection or not. Estrangement does not happen because someone stops loving their family. It happens because they slowly, quietly run out of the capacity to keep absorbing the same wounds and calling it love. And here is what makes this so difficult to understand from the outside. The pressure that builds toward estrangement is almost entirely invisible. To the people watching, everything looks normal. Holidays are attended, birthdays are acknowledged. The family appears intact. What they cannot see is what is happening beneath the surface. The accumulating weight, the slow erosion, the private grief of someone who keeps hoping this time will be different and keeps finding that it is not. If this is resonating with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find content like this when they need it most. Now, let us keep going. Psychologists sometimes use the image of a volcano to describe what estrangement looks like from the outside. A volcanic eruption appears sudden only to those who never felt the ground shaking beneath it. The lava does not form overnight. It builds slowly, under pressure, in the dark, for years. And when it finally surfaces, the people standing nearby are shocked because they never knew the pressure was there. To the parent or sibling who experiences estrangement as abandonment, it feels like a sudden and inexplicable rejection. To the adult child who finally made that choice, it represents years, sometimes decades, of unacknowledged suffering, finally reaching a threshold that could no longer be ignored. The silence appears sudden only because the pain was endured so quietly for so long. That is not a small distinction. That is the entire story. Let us talk about something that begins long before distance does. Long before anyone stops returning calls or skips a holiday, something is already happening inside the family system that shapes everything that comes after. In families where estrangement eventually occurs, there is often a pattern that family systems theorists have studied carefully. It is the assignment of roles. Not chosen roles, not roles that emerge from who a person actually is, but roles that are assigned by the family system to serve the family's emotional needs, often at the expense of the individual inside them. There is the golden child, the one elevated and protected as an extension of the parent's ego, praised not for who they are, but for how well they fulfill the family's preferred narrative of itself. Their role is to succeed, to reflect well, to validate, and the cost of that role is often authenticity, because the moment they deviate from the script, the warmth begins to cool. There is the scapegoat, the one blamed for tension they did not create, the one who becomes the container for the family's unprocessed pain. And here is what research consistently finds about the scapegoat role. It is often occupied by the most emotionally aware person in the family system, the one who sees clearly what others cannot or will not name. Their clarity makes them a threat to the family's preferred version of reality, and so they are labeled the problem, the difficult one, the one who always stirs things up. There is the invisible child, the one who survives by disappearing, by needing little, asking for less, staying quiet enough not to disturb the fragile equilibrium. They grow up to be remarkably self-sufficient and remarkably uncertain whether they are allowed to take up space in the world. And there is the parentified child, the one given emotional responsibilities that belong to adults, the one who learns early that love is something you earn through service, through sacrifice, through being whatever the people around you need you to be. They become fluent in everyone else's emotional landscape and strangers to their own. None of these roles leave room for a true self to develop. None of them ask the question, who is this person actually? What do they need? What are they feeling? They ask instead, what function does this person serve? And when someone begins to step outside their assigned role, when they begin to ask those forbidden questions about who they actually are, the family system does not celebrate this growth. It resists it, sometimes gently, sometimes fiercely, but almost always consistently. Reclaiming your own identity inside a family system that requires you to be something else is not experienced as growth by that system. It is experienced as betrayal. And the person doing the reclaiming is often told in 100 different ways that their awakening is the problem. Estrangement often begins not with leaving people, but with refusing a role. With saying quietly or loudly, I am not the scapegoat. I am not the invisible one. I am not here to manage your emotions for you. I am a person. And that refusal, that first act of self-definition, is often where the real rupture begins. I want to pause here and ask you something. If any of these roles felt familiar when you heard them described, which one did you carry? And when did you first begin to realize it had been given to you rather than chosen? Leave that in the comments if you feel comfortable. You might be surprised how many people recognize exactly what you are describing. There is a particular kind of wound that leaves no visible mark and no clear moment to point to. No single incident that explains it. No scene you can replay to justify what you feel. It is the wound of emotional neglect, and it is one of the most misunderstood and under-acknowledged sources of pain in family relationships. Emotional neglect is not defined by what happened. It is defined by what never did. The comfort that was never offered. The curiosity that was never shown. The question that was never asked. How are you, really? The moment you came home hurting and the adults around you were present in body, but absent in every way that mattered. The feeling, repeated across years of childhood, that your inner life was either invisible or inconvenient. Children who grow up in emotionally neglectful environments often develop a particular kind of competence. They learn to handle things themselves. They learn to need less, or at least to appear to need less. They become capable and contained and quietly, persistently aching in a way they cannot explain to anyone, including themselves, because there is no single event to point to. There is only the accumulated absence of something that should have been there. As adults, they often return to their family of origin, carrying a hope they cannot quite extinguish. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe this visit, this conversation, this holiday, they will finally feel seen. Maybe if they explain it the right way, or if they stop expecting so much, or if they just try a little harder, the connection they have always needed will finally arrive. Psychologists describe this as returning to an empty well, a source you keep going back to despite the evidence that nothing is there. And each return that ends in the same familiar disappointment does not just leave you thirsty, it leaves you a little less of yourself, because you have once again reached for something that was not given back. Estrangement happens, in many cases, when someone finally makes the painful and tender decision to stop thirsting for a love that was never going to come in the form they needed. Not out of hatred, not out of resentment, but out of a kind of exhausted self-compassion that says, I cannot keep doing this to myself. I deserve more than an empty well. And here is the truth most people miss when they look at estrangement from the outside. The people who walk away are almost never the ones who stopped caring. They are often the ones who cared the most, for the longest time, at the greatest cost to themselves. There is a psychological mechanism that keeps people in painful relationships far longer than anyone on the outside can understand. and it is one of the most important concepts for understanding why estrangement takes so long to happen. It is called trauma bonding. Trauma bonding occurs when harm and warmth are intermixed in a relationship, when a cutting remark is followed by a moment of genuine affection, when a boundary is violated and then repaired just enough to keep hope alive, when cruelty and kindness arrive from the same source and your nervous system learns to confuse the relief of the kindness with love itself. This is not a character flaw. This is neurobiology. The intermittent reinforcement of pain and warmth creates one of the strongest and most difficult to break forms of emotional attachment known to psychology. It is the same mechanism that keeps people in abusive romantic relationships, and it operates just as powerfully, sometimes more powerfully, within families, because the attachment to a parent or sibling carries the weight of our earliest and most fundamental bonds. The hope cycle that trauma bonding creates is insidious in its persistence. You believe, despite evidence to the contrary, that if you try harder, communicate more clearly, stay calmer, give more, need less, the relationship will become what you need it to be. You focus not on who this person consistently is, but on who they occasionally seem capable of being. You wait for the version of them that appeared briefly and then retreated. You mistake endurance for loyalty and hope for love. And so you stay. You stay for years. You stay through patterns that repeat without changing. You stay through conversations that circle back to the same place every time. You stay because leaving feels like giving up on someone you love, and staying feels like proof that you are a good person, a loyal person, a person who does not abandon their family. Estrangement begins, in many cases, when that hope finally breaks. Not in an explosion of rage, but in a quiet, devastating recognition. This is not going to change. Not because they cannot change, but because they have shown me consistently, over many years, that they will not. And I have finally run out of the capacity to keep hoping. Otherwise, that moment is not a moment of cruelty. It is a moment of clarity. And it is usually one of the most painful moments in a person's life. What was the moment for you, or for someone you love, when that clarity finally arrived? Sometimes naming it, even quietly in a comment, can be part of how we begin to make sense of it. You do not have to share the whole story. Even a single sentence can matter. Why then does leaving feel so wrong? Even when it is the only sane choice remaining, why does it feel like a moral failure? Why do so many people who make this decision carry guilt so heavy it almost collapses them? Because they were taught that it should. Because the message woven into their earliest understanding of love and loyalty was that family is unconditional, which was quietly translated into your endurance must be unconditional, that no matter what happens, no matter how you are treated, no matter what it costs you, you do not leave. And if you do leave, if you choose your own peace over your family's comfort, then you are the one who broke something sacred. This framing is so deeply embedded that even people who intellectually understand why they made the choice they made still feel it in their bodies as betrayal. They still wake up at 3 in the morning wondering if they did the right thing. They still feel the pull of obligation even after they have clearly seen the pattern. They still carry the voice that says, "A good person would have found another way." But here is what that voice never acknowledges. They did find other ways. They tried them all. The difficult conversations that went nowhere. The boundaries set and violated. The therapy, the books, the letters written and sometimes sent and sometimes not. The low contact periods that were supposed to create space for something to shift. The apologies offered and the ones waited for that never came. The years of shrinking themselves to fit inside a space that was never quite big enough for who they actually were. Estrangement is almost never the first option. It is the last one. It arrives after everything else has been tried and found insufficient. And the people who make that choice are not cold or unfeeling. They are, in most cases, people who felt everything deeply for a very long time and finally made the decision to stop disappearing in order to maintain a connection that was costing them their sense of self. Staying meant losing themselves slowly, 1 year at a time. And somewhere in that recognition, a different kind of loyalty emerged. A loyalty to the self they had been slowly abandoning. A loyalty to the person they might still become if they stopped walking back into the fire out of obligation. When people hear the phrase "no contact," they often imagine something punitive. A door slammed in anger, a punishment designed to wound. But for most people who arrive at that decision, the reality is far more complicated and far more tender than that. For many, distance does not begin with no contact. It begins with something quieter, fewer visits, shorter calls, a gradual reduction in access that is less about punishment and more about self-preservation. Psychologists sometimes call this low contact, and it represents an attempt to reshape the relationship without ending it entirely. It is a way of saying, "I still care, but I cannot keep giving full access to something that consistently hurts me." Others use what is sometimes called the gray rock method, becoming emotionally neutral and unreactive in interactions, not out of coldness, but out of protection. When you have learned that your emotional responses are used against you, that your vulnerability becomes ammunition, that your reactions are the fuel for escalation, then becoming still and unremarkable is not a withdrawal of love. It is a way of surviving contact without being destroyed by it. And for some, after years of boundaries that were consistently ignored, after low contact that changed nothing, after grey rock that protected the surface but left the underlying pattern untouched, no contact becomes the only remaining option. Not because they hate their family, but because every other boundary failed. Because the relationship, in its current form, has no pathway toward health. And because continuing to engage means continuing to be harmed. What follows that choice is not the relief that people on the outside might assume. Or rather, it is relief, but it arrives alongside something far more complicated. there is grief. There is guilt. There is a particular kind of disorientation that comes from stepping out of a structure that has organized your entire emotional life, even when that structure was painful. There is the strange experience of your nervous system finally relaxing and not quite knowing what to do with the quiet. And there is ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss is a concept developed by family therapist Pauline Boss, and it describes grief that has no clear ending, no social recognition, no ritual to mark it. It is the grief of mourning someone who is still alive, someone you could theoretically call tomorrow, someone whose absence has no funeral, no eulogy, no casserole brought to your door by neighbors who understand what you have lost. You are grieving a relationship that never fully existed as you needed it to. You are mourning the parent who was physically present but emotionally absent, the sibling who chose the family's version of reality over you, the holidays that felt like performances rather than warmth, the childhood that was survivable but not safe, the love that was conditional in ways you spent years trying not to see. And this grief is invisible to almost everyone around you. Holidays are the hardest. You sit with the empty space where obligation used to be and feel something that does not have a clean name. Relief and sadness and guilt and a strange, complicated peace all at the same time. Other people are posting photographs of family gatherings, and you are sitting with a quiet that is both chosen and unchosen, both a relief and an ache. You cannot explain it fully to people who have not lived it. You cannot post about it without inviting judgment. You cannot grieve it publicly the way you would grieve a death, because the world does not have a language for this particular kind of loss. And so you carry it privately, in the same way you carried so much of what led you here. This is valid. This grief is real. The fact that it is invisible does not make it smaller. It often makes it larger, because invisible grief has nowhere to go. And here is what no one tells you about the other side of that grief. When the noise finally quiets, something unexpected begins to surface. Not immediately, not without difficulty, but eventually. A sense of self that has been buried beneath years of roles and fear and emotional survival strategies begins to find its way toward the light. Reclaiming identity after estrangement is not a sudden transformation. It is slow and tender and often disorienting, because you have spent so long understanding yourself in relation to a family system that you may not fully know who you are outside of it. You have spent so long filtering your choices through the question of how they will be received that you may not know what you actually want when that filter is removed. You begin asking questions you were never safely allowed to ask before. What do I actually enjoy? What do I believe, not what was I told to believe? What does it feel like to make a choice purely because it is right for me without rehearsing how to defend it? What is my voice when it is not shaped around managing someone else's reaction? These questions are not comfortable at first. They can feel vertiginous, like standing in a room where all the furniture has been removed. The structure that organized your inner life, even when it was painful, is gone. And what replaces it is not immediately clear, but something does replace it. Slowly, it does. Choices stop being filtered through fear of judgment or punishment or emotional backlash. You stop shrinking in ways you did not even realize you were shrinking. You stop apologizing for your existence in the quiet, constant ways that had become so habitual you could not see them. You start trusting your own perception, your own memory, your own inner voice, which may have been questioned and dismissed for so long that you stopped trusting it yourself. This is not a linear process. There are setbacks. There are moments of doubt so heavy they feel like certainty. There are days when the guilt comes back with full force, and you wonder again whether you did the right thing. There are moments when you miss not the relationship as it was, but the relationship as you always hoped it might become. The one you kept waiting for, the one that never arrived. Healing from estrangement means learning to grieve that imagined relationship, the parent you needed and did not have, the family that was safe and warm in the way families are supposed to be, the childhood that prepared you for the world instead of requiring you to survive it. You are allowed to grieve that. You are allowed to feel the full weight of what was missing, not just what was harmful. And many people who make this choice carry something else alongside their grief. A clarity that feels almost like a vow. This ends with me, not as a declaration of resentment, but as an act of profound intention. The decision not to pass forward the patterns that were passed to them, to become for themselves and for whoever they choose to build a life with, the kind of safety they were never given. To break a cycle not out of anger, but out of love, the love they are finally learning to extend toward themselves. There is something important that needs to be said directly, because it is the thing that people who have made this choice most need to hear, and least often do. You are not cold. You are not dramatic. You are not selfish, ungrateful, or broken. You are not someone who gave up too easily or stopped loving too soon. You are not the villain in someone else's story, even if that is the role you have been assigned. You are someone who tried for years in ways that were invisible to almost everyone watching, who tried until trying became a form of self-erasure, who held on to hope longer than hope deserved to be held, who forgave things that most people would not have forgiven, who gave chances that most people would not have given, who stayed in rooms that cost you something every single time you walked into them. And then you made a decision that the world does not have good language for, a decision to stop. Not because love disappeared, but because continuing had become incompatible with surviving as a whole person, because the relationship in its current form was not a relationship. It was a performance of one, and you had been performing it at the cost of everything real inside you. Walking away from family is not the easy choice. It is never the easy choice. It is the choice that comes after all the easier choices have been exhausted. It is the choice that arrives when someone finally understands that staying means losing themselves completely, and they decide that they are worth more than that. You are worth more than that. The world will not always understand this. Some people in your life will choose the simpler narrative, the one where you are the one who abandoned your family, the one where the break was dramatic and unjustified and says something unflattering about your character. And you will have to carry the truth of what actually happened in a world that does not always have the patience or the capacity to hold that truth with you. But the truth is what it is. The years are what they were. The attempts you made are real, even if no one witnessed them. The pain was real, even if it was invisible. The decision you made was not made lightly or quickly or without love. It was made with love. In fact, a love that finally extended itself toward you. You are allowed to grieve what you lost. You are allowed to feel complicated things about people you have chosen distance from. You are allowed to love someone and still recognize that proximity to them is harming you. You are allowed to hold both the grief and the relief without having to choose between them or explain them to anyone's satisfaction. You are allowed to build a life shaped by safety, to surround yourself with people who see you clearly and treat that seeing as a gift rather than a threat, to create, slowly and imperfectly, the kind of family that is built on choice rather than obligation, on warmth rather than performance, on the kind of love that does not require you to disappear in order to receive it. Chosen family is real. The connections you build from a place of wholeness rather than survival are real. The life you construct on the other side of a painful and necessary decision is real, and it belongs to you. For some people, family is the people who raised them. For others, it becomes something different, something chosen rather than assigned, something built on the foundation of who you actually are rather than who you were required to be. Neither of these definitions is wrong. Both of them are human. What is not human is the expectation that you must remain in a relationship that consistently harms you simply because it carries the name of family. What is not love is the demand that you endure without limit, forgive without acknowledgement, and shrink without complaint in the name of loyalty. Real loyalty does not ask you to disappear. Real love does not require your silence about your own pain. Real family, in whatever form it takes, makes you feel more like yourself, not less. And if you have spent years feeling less like yourself in rooms full of people who share your blood, that is not evidence of your failure. That is evidence of a very specific and very real kind of suffering that you have been carrying, mostly alone, for a very long time. You are not alone in this. There are more people who understand exactly what you are describing than the silence around this topic would suggest. Estrangement is far more common than it is spoken about, precisely because the shame and the judgment and the inadequacy of available language make it one of the hardest experiences to bring into the open. If you know someone who is quietly carrying this, someone who has made this choice or is standing at the edge of it, consider sharing this video with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for another person is hand them the language for something they have been living without words for. It does not require a conversation or an explanation, just the quiet act of saying, "I saw this and thought of you." That alone can make someone feel less invisible at exactly the moment they need it most. But the silence does not mean you are alone. It means you are part of a quiet and largely invisible community of people who made an impossible choice and are living with all of its complexity. People who are grieving and healing and rebuilding simultaneously. People who are learning slowly and with difficulty to trust themselves again. People who chose their own survival and are still, some days, not entirely sure they were allowed to. You were allowed to. You are allowed to. Your peace is not a punishment. Your distance is not cruelty. Your choice to stop walking into a fire out of obligation is not a betrayal of love. It is, in its own complicated and painful way, one of the most loving things you have ever done. For yourself and for whoever comes after you. If this video gave language to something you have been carrying without words, I hope it helped, even a little. I hope it made the weight feel slightly less private. I hope it offered some small measure of the validation that you deserved to receive a long time ago and may still be waiting for. If you feel safe, share your experience in the comments. Not because you owe anyone your story, but because someone else might be sitting with the same invisible weight and might need to know that they are not alone. Your voice, even briefly, even partially, might be the thing that lets someone else breathe a little more freely. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And thank you for having the courage to look clearly at something that the world too often refuses to see.